I may have shared this story with you one time before, but in the neighborhood in Central Phoenix where we lived, when I moved there, it was almost every house was decorated for Christmas. By the time that we left, there were about 3 houses left on the block that were decorated for Christmas. And the reason was the neighborhood was transitioning into a Jewish neighborhood, an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood on top of it. The synagogues were there, and so they needed to be within walking distance of the synagogue since they didn't drive. Well, most of them didn't drive on the Sabbath. So I learned as this was happening to be careful on Saturdays, because I had the tendency to back out of our driveway and just back out of the driveway and not paint, because who walks in Phoenix? Nobody walks in Phoenix, especially in the middle of summer. Well, the Orthodox Jewish community does, no matter how hot it was. So I had to be careful, because a couple of times I just about ran people down backing out of the driveway because I didn't see them. So I was always very careful. Well, a family moved in next door, and they had little children on up. And one particular Saturday I was going out, they were all out in the front yard for some reason. So I noticed that the littlest boy, he was the cutest little boy, had a real cute hat, kind of the hats that I wear. So when I backed out, I pulled up to the curb and rolled the window down. Well, he immediately ran over to the car. And I said, "I like your hat." Well, the first thing that he did is said, "Why are you driving?" And I kind of went, what? I don't even, I have been trying over the last couple of days, trying to remember what I said to him. I don't remember what I said to him. If I responded to his question or what I did, because I was just kind of in shock. Well, immediately when he asked the question, his mother comes running across the yard and kind of says, okay, it's time to go. And his mother kind of ushered him off. And I laughed about it all the way to the gym. That's where I was going, and back. So when I came back home, they were still out in the front. So I decided to go over and, just to assure them that I had no problem with him asking me a question. And the mother said, you should have heard what the next question was he asked. And to life of me, I can't remember what she said, but what I was saying to her was, it's okay that he asks questions. Don't put him down, or don't shut him off, or don't close him off to asking the questions, because it's good. And she said, yes, we know, but sometimes he just asks way too many questions. And the father then said to me, especially about the driving, he said he always asked, he grew up in Israel, and he always asked his father the same question: why are you driving on the Sabbath? And I knew that they were a family that drove, because on a Friday evening, their house would be full of people, and you could go out about 10 o'clock and all the cars in the front of their house were gone. So I went, they're not too Orthodox here, because they're driving away from the Sabbath dinner. But the dad said, he said, when we would ask our father that question, the father would say, well, son, there are Jews that drive on Sabbath, and then there are Jews that don't drive on Sabbath. And we're one of those who drive on Sabbath. And that seemed to solve the question. I bring that up because the moniker for Chalice is where questions are as important as answers. And so I did a little research on types of questions. And the simplest one that I found, meaning there was at least one other entry on Google search where there were 50 types of questions. And I thought you would be totally bored if I went through 50 types of questions. Don't worry. The list that I have is 15 types of questions. And I'm not going to go through all the types of questions, but I found it fascinating as to how many different types of questions there are. Remember, it has to do with the age-old Greek philosophical system of the Socratic method, right? Those who are teachers, right, Carla, that in the Socratic method, you raise questions. And I even did a research. So what's the Socratic method? Because I wasn't quite sure. I remember what that was. But the point, at least in the contemporary way of understanding it, was that you ask questions which are to refine each question that gets asked after a supposed answer is given. And the point is that somewhere along the way that you can develop critical thinking skills, where you kind of go, well, gee, that's not, if I ask this question and I get this answer, well, that doesn't satisfy me. And so you ask another question, and maybe that doesn't satisfy you, but you see you're being led down a path somewhere, hopefully with a goal at the end, but maybe not. I remember I was doing some research in the library, and my minimal skill with Greek in particular, that I was trying to find what the background of the Greek word that we'll be considering in just a moment when we celebrate the Lord's Supper, is that it says, take this and eat. And so the particular Greek word there was what I was curious about, because in some instances it can be translated one way, and other instances it can. Well, I just wanted to find, where does this word come from? What's the larger context of this word? So that was my question. What's the larger context of this word? Well, come to find out that the word actually has to do, and for the life of me, I can't remember what the Greek word is, but it has to do more with the drama, the Greek dramas of the theater. That when you pass through the doorway into the magnificent theater, that it had to do with taking what the actors and the drama are going to give you, so that you receive, that there's kind of a giving, meaning they're giving it to us, but you're also then receiving it. And the idea is that it's this action idea, not that it has to do, I know what the Greek word was, traditio is the Latin word. And traditio, as it gets translated from Latin into English, has to do with tradition. And tradition in this sense often means a set of either doctrines or dogmas or beliefs, or how we tend to say it is, well, we've always done it this way. Whether we have or not, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But that's what it is. So that the tradition is that Jesus takes the bread, blesses it, breaks it, so that in giving something to us, we are receiving it. Excuse me. And that's the idea. But it was funny that at one point in this process of doing the research, as I kept asking questions, I started at like point A, and each time that I went to the next thing, I was over here at point B, but then I went over here to point, and finally I got out about the 6th or 7th time that I'd asked the question, and I go, well, how the heck did I get over here? It has nothing to do with how I started. And sometimes asking kinds of questions leads us down a path where we go, well, how did we get over here? What did that question that led to another question that led to another question? And that seems to be what the gospel is about today. That Jesus hears that John is in prison, and so they come to Jesus and ask him, are you the one? There's a question. Are you the one that we've been expecting? And typical to the gospel, Jesus doesn't answer yes, which would be a simple answer to a question, right? He says, well, what did you see? Well, if they were in the right place at the right time, then they saw a lot. And he kind of gives them a clue, right? Well, what did you see? Well, the blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear, the poor have good news proclaimed to them. Wow, that's a lot. Does that answer the question, though? Yeah, no, not really. Yes, it does, if you take into account what the text from Isaiah, right? That Isaiah says in this time, in the larger context of the prophet Isaiah, is indeed in a time when the people of the northern kingdom of Israel are being taken into exile by the Assyrians. And so they are weak. They are, the end of the world has happened for them. And so they're asking a question. I thought we were the chosen ones. I thought we were your special people. I thought you were going to be our God always. Why are we in this? And you see how that many questions. That's not in the text, by the way. But sometimes in scripture, you have to read between the lines some of the questions, right? And so Isaiah says, yes, you're right. But here's what's going to happen. And Isaiah then paints a picture, as we've heard many times in many different places, that it's going to be a time of rejoicing. The blind will see, the lame will walk. No wonder Matthew connects this story to Isaiah. It does seem possible that Jesus fulfills that question. Now, I happen to think about it because, well, in all of the list of the questions, there's questions that are to evaluate, questions like using what you know about this, which of these answers or solutions is the best? Comparison questions, what are the major similarities or dissimilarities? Application questions, how did this person use their leadership skills? There's all kinds of questions. And so I got to thinking about questions, and believe it or not, in all of my moves over the past 60 plus years, I managed to keep a hold of a book. Those who are Catholic, and I found out from Jim that this is not true of the disciples, so that kind of blew my whole sermon when I found out that the disciples don't buy into this. But at least if you came out of a Catholic tradition or Lutheran tradition or a Reformed tradition of some sort, then there were what was called catechisms. How many have heard the word catechism or remember catechism? So that a catechism, the purpose of it, at least for, let's go back to Luther, when Luther is the first as this move in the Reformation begins to take place, that Luther puts together a catechism that is, well, here's what we believe. So that it's formulated in the Socratic way in terms of questions. Well, growing up in the Catholic Church, and by the way, this is, if you've ever heard the term Baltimore Catechism, and the Baltimore Catechism #1 for all that. So here I am in first grade, about 1960. So almost 60 years ago was when I got this. And the Baltimore Catechism came about as early as the 1820s for the American Catholic Church, when they were already beginning to experience the influx of immigrants. And the immigrants were coming from places where the level of education of the immigrant was not very great. And so the expectation of the clergy was that, the people sitting in the pew should have some understanding of what the faith is about. Because if you have no clue in the world what I'm talking about Jesus or God or the church or faith or morality or ethics, if you have no clue what I'm talking about, what's the point? And so to give you some foundation upon which to have some knowledge about the faith, the history of the church, the traditions of the church, the gospels, who Jesus is, what Trinity means, all of those great theological words, that a catechism was put together, at least in the American Catholic Church, to help immigrants understand what the faith was about. And so, for instance, it's set up in the Socratic way. So this is the first question in the Baltimore Catechism. Now, think about it, being a 7-year-old, right? Being a 7 or 8-year-old. The first question that you're going to ask somebody is, who made us? Now, I always think, I don't know if this is true, it wasn't for me, that I often think of parents when they're little boy or girl comes to them and says, "Where did I come from?" And immediately the parents freak out because they think that their 7-year-old is asking a question about sex, when all they want to know is where they come from. And so if the parents launch into an answer to that question with a long dissertation about sexuality, likelihood the child's going to roll their eyes and just go, "That's not," I don't think they would ever say, "That's not what I was asking." But they would just go, "Oh, okay. I just wanted to know where I come from, from Pennsylvania, from wherever, And so the first question in the Baltimore Catechism is, who made us? And the answer is supposed to be, you're all supposed to answer, God made us. Who is God? Now this is a good one. Who is God? Can you imagine a 7-year-old being asked that question? Who is God? So the answer is supposed to be, God is the supreme being who made all things. I love some of the 7-year-olds who answered this. God is a string being. Because supreme being, what is that? So what you hear, right, is a string being. Okay, well, that's rather interesting, right? To answer the question, string being. Well, it goes on. Why did God make us? God made us to show forth his goodness and to share with us his everlasting happiness in heaven. What must we do to gain the happiness of heaven? You see how each question builds upon the other. To gain the happiness of heaven, we must know, love, and serve God in this world. Now, that's a really important question, actually. To love, to know, to love, and to serve God in this world. The point is that from an experience of a catechism, the idea is, or the expectation is, and by the way, we were tested on this, that the old Monsignor would come into the classroom and ask you questions and would go, "Who made you?" And you were already scared to death of church, priests, nuns. They were already pretty scary people. All of that. And so you have to wonder how much of what you were kind of responding to. Because, right, we all know it's easy to memorize answers to questions, isn't it? Right? How many would agree? How many agree that it's easy to memorize answers to questions? The question, do we really know what we're answering? Do we really know what the answer is about? It's like, right, Carla, you probably see this in some of the students. I know in my students, right, that they study for a test. They put the right answers down on the paper. A week later, do you think they know what they put on the paper? No, they have no clue in the world. Meaning, how far did that information go into their life? About as far as memorizing it for the test, and after they've taken the test, boom, out it goes. To the next test, boom, in more information, out it goes. Now, I actually believe that it goes into that great computer bank, iCloud in the sky, and at some point, what I always tell my students when they just are absolutely frustrated with me, especially nurses who are working back-to-back 12-hour shifts, have 3 or 4 kids at home, they're just totally befuddled by the information that they have to get in order to write their papers in my class, and they just feel so overwhelmed. And I go, you know what? Relax. It's there. It may not be on instant recall, not mouth, instant recall head. But I always think this way, at some point in your life, at some point, something will happen, somebody will say something, at some point in the future, something will happen, and all of a sudden the light bulb will go on in your head and go, "Oh, that's what Dr. Meyer was saying." And I always tell them at that point, please pull over to the side of the road and enjoy the moment, because it's come as a real revelation. Trust me, we all do this, right? We do this when our parents were telling us, when we ask questions of our parents, and our parents would give us answers. I would bet that every single person here, at least the older people anyway, right? At least the older people will go at some point along their way, either when they're telling their children to do something that they were told when they were children, that all of a sudden the light bulb goes on in your head and you go, oh, that's what mom or dad said. Now I understand, right? 30, 40 years later, right? At least it happened somehow or another. The reason why I'm suggesting that is because you see in the second part, Jesus turns back onto the followers of John and says, well, what did you go out to see? What was it that led you out into the wilderness? What did you go out to see? A reed blowing in the wind? Did you hear something about that? What did you go out to see? Somebody finely dressed? Did you go out to see those things? Or were you really searching for something or seeking something? Did it have anything to do with the Messiah? No, you might have been seeking your own gain. You might have been seeking your own success. You might have been seeking answers to questions that you never thought you would ask anybody. And by the way, I always tell my students, please, and this I think has to be true for us in church. If our moniker as Chalice is, questions are as important as answers, then it has to be this. And I think this is where we have to be in church today. Let me say it the way I say it. There are no dumb or stupid questions. Because sometimes students go, I'll ask them, why didn't you ask that? Well, because I thought it was stupid, or I thought it was dumb. No, every question is important. Just like I said of that little child. Every question that he asks is important. I may not always have an answer to the question. And I will be honest in saying that. I don't know. But I will also say, let's go and find an answer. Let's go and do some research. Let's do some searching together. Maybe we'll find it. Maybe we won't. Who knows? That's a part of the journey that we're on. The only dumb or stupid question is the one you don't ask. Why? Because see, you never have an opportunity to move towards an answer or find some solution to the question or problem that you have. I would bet that there were times either because of clergy, parents, who told us to stop asking questions. I would bet there were. Especially if it's a little child who goes, why? Why? Well, because I said so. Why? Well, because I'm your parent. Why? And after a while, you just get so frustrated with the little child, just shut up. And you see that's the death of any possibility of critical thinking. Shut up. I would bet that there are women who have been told to shut up by men who think they know all the answers. And so women never, until recently, have been able to have the freedom, the dignity to ask questions. Why does it have to be this way? If we can't answer to that, then you see what happens is that we never either grow in our ability to think critically, we never grow more fully as human beings. Many years ago, I went on a trip to China. I'm not exactly sure. I didn't know anything about China because in school we never were taught anything about China. And it was probably more because of the Vietnam War and anti-communism. And so we just believed that everything about China couldn't be good. Nothing could be good. It was just all bad. It was all evil. It was communist. And so we never learned anything about China. And finally, I decided I want to go. I just want to see what it is, right? That's a part of the curiosity that human beings need to be able to have. I want to find out. That's kind of a question, a probing question. And so I remember, in particular, going through a temple, and this was after the Cultural Revolution, when things were open, monasteries and places were open again. And so what you can visit there, of course, are some of the ancient monasteries. And I remember, in particular, I was actually in Tibet, and we were visiting this ancient monastery, and I knew nothing, even less about Buddhism than I did about China. Because again, where in our course of study do we have an encounter with any other religion besides our own, usually, right? Where do we come to know who Buddhists are, or Hindus are, or Muslims are, or Jews are, or anybody else, right? We don't, unless we have an encounter with them. And so we were going through this temple, and it just struck me as odd, because there was a representation of Buddha this way, and a representation of Buddha this way, and a different representation of Buddha this way. And so at each Buddha, I went, well, who's that? And the guy didn't know. Okay. The next image of Buddha, I said, who's that? And they didn't know. And I got frustrated. And finally, as we were leaving the temple, I stopped them. I said, you know, I get that maybe the encounter with religion was totally denied you as a Chinese citizen. But you know, you're a tour guide. And it would behoove you to know who these representations are, because we want to know something about you and want to know what your culture is about, whatever the ancient religion was about. And they just looked at me in shock. Like, why would you want to know those things? Well, because I want to know about Buddhism. Because it's not a threat, but rather an enhancement. And you see, I would hope that any kinds of questions that you may have at any point along the way, as members of Chalice, as members of the Christian community, as members, citizens of the United States, that we not only feel free to ask questions, but that we are encouraged to ask questions. And being encouraged to ask questions, to always remember, you may not always have the answers, and that's okay. Parents, you don't always have to have the answers. But if the response is, I don't know, but let's go find out, then that's an important response to make. The same goes with questions asked here as members of Chalice. I don't know, but let's go find out. Together, you see, it not only becomes an individual response, but it becomes a community response. And I think that's where the gospel is. I don't know if Jesus is the Messiah. I don't know if Jesus is the third person of the Blessed Trinity, has a divine nature and human nature. Perhaps those questions, those are answers. If those answers are important, maybe they are, maybe they don't. You see, there's another question. And it leads us into the deeper mystery and reality of the divine in our midst.